Maybe you're overselling this poll? This time on Poll Hub, a Washington magazine gives a lot of weight to a poll with a lot of problems. We'll explain, as we like to do, that not all polls are created equal. Then, how long is too long when you're talking about your life? A poll asks Americans how long they want to live and under what circumstances. You know what I say? If there's a zombie invasion, take me now, but not before we do this episode of Poll Hub. And hi, everybody. Welcome to Poll Hub. I'm Jay DeDapper, Director of Innovation here at the Marist Poll.
And I'm Barbara Carvalho, Director of the Marist Poll.
And I'm Miringoff, Director of the Marist College Institute for Public Opinion.
So there's a poll, and it's done in a bunch of states, and it asks some questions about Donald Trump and Joe Biden. And the Washington Examiner, a pretty well-known publication, it's a weekly magazine, but also a website that gets a lot of traffic. They write up an article, and they give it a lot of play. What's wrong with that?
A whole bunch of things. And
wait.
Well,
a second.
okay, pause.
Let's talk about the good news. Because there is some
There's
good news.
There's no zombie apocalypse. Is
That's
that
true.
No.
There's no zombie invasion. There's no
what you got,
zombie
Barb?
apocalypse. So we're stuck with you for a while, Jay.
So what's the good news on
Well,
this?
I think the good news is that, in reading this article, we talk a lot about transparency in polling, and there is a lot of information about the poll in this article.
To be fair, absolutely.
So I think, kudos to the Washington Examiner, in particular, David Drucker, who was the author of the article. He certainly puts the numbers in context. By way of talking a little bit about this, it was a poll of 6 states, battleground states, which Trump did very well in 2016.
Florida, Iowa, Michigan, Pennsylvania, Texas, and Wisconsin.
Exactly. And this poll does...
All states he carried, if I was hearing you correctly?
Yes, okay. Absolutely.
Okay.
And he's ahead in this poll in 4 of those states, Florida, Iowa, Texas, and Wisconsin, when presented against Biden, who is certainly the Democratic, leader at this point.
And that was kind of the headline from the article is, hey, in these states that Trump has got to win or a Democrat's got to win, because this is where it all comes down. Look at this. Trump's beating Biden.
Battlegrounds.
Trump's beating Biden in 4 of them. Biden's beating Trump in 2. That sounds great, but there's a lot of problems, as you
Anybody know
suggested.
offhand when Biden announced?
Well, I think the people who were conducting the poll, and I think that is the big issue, which is prominently discussed in the article as well. It was done by WPA Intelligence on behalf of Americans for Fair Skies, both Republican and advocacy and lobbying groups. They kind of have skin in the game. I believe that WPA Intelligence was actually, part of the Cruz campaign.
Yes.
I think they did work for
Senate,
Cruz,
or for president,
for president,
yep.
and Senate, I think, and then also, the organization American for Fair Skies is a lobbying group. They have a vested interest in policy, which has to do with
airline
travel and airline carriers and the
competition.
So that's who did the
point
poll.
Here.
Right.
This, okay?
So that's who did the poll.
Yes.
And the poll's in 6 states.
It's nice to know, and Barb correctly identifies transparency as being
and they listed
more
it
than
so we
enough
know.
In this.
Right. So
and
what's the problem?
They even said they did it to gain the attention of the president on a trade dispute. So they actually talked about the reason for the poll as well.
Sometimes you gain the president's attention when you want it, and sometimes when you don't. But
that doesn't mean a political journalist needs to use the poll to make it seem like one candidate is ahead or another. So what's the problem?
So let's wind it back to where we were a few moments ago and say that in these 6 states, although they did a lot of interviews altogether, they only did 200 in each of the states. So the margin of error, which was 2.8%
for 1,200
the margin
interviews
of error, which
overall.
2.8% for that entire sample falls to, or increases, I should say, to 6.9% for each of the individual states. Now, if you look at the gap separating Biden and Trump in each of those 6 states, I don't think you can conclude in either of them who might be ahead. So I think the headline then and the story is fairly misleading.
Are there any reputable polls? And there are a lot of polls out there that do a good job, scientifically, statistically significant.
Yeah, easy
that
for you
would,
to say.
Yeah, that would release a poll with results with 200 likely voters.
There's one thing to release and maybe call it a composite of the battleground states, but to start zeroing in and digging deeper into each state and then making that the story, which states are who's ahead by, and that the conclusion here is, Michigan and some of the other state is, in very different shape than the other 4 for the president. That can be very misleading.
There's no question. I mean, there's no question
she's moved
that
to my side.
it's not that I've moved to your side, Lee. Come on, we're not supposed to have sides. You're doing this tribe thing. I think it was just important that transparency is important, and the reason why we can also, though, discuss this poll is because of the information that was placed in the article. Now, whether they should have done it or not, that's a we can debate that one as well. But I do agree that there are lots of issues with this poll, sample size being one. For instance, I don't think we know how the poll was actually conducted. They said that it was of likely voters, but we don't know if it was
and we would
a telephone
object
poll,
also
an
to be
online
doing
poll.
likely voters for more than a year in advance when people don't even have a clue whether they're voting or not. And we don't even know who the nominee of the Democratic Party is, assuming Donald Trump is the Republican nominee. So it's a little uneven at this point to be putting the incumbent president up against someone who has 22 opponents seeking the nomination.
Right.
Well,
so
we saw that last time, too.
But just to make it clear, this isn't like sour grapes from a pollster or polling group to another. We've been very consistent on Poll Hub that we think it's really important that people understand what's out there in the polls that they're looking at. And I think this is a case, as a former journalist, where a journalist didn't follow those rules. In quoting and saying there's a trove of information that could offer clues to 2020 in here, that is simply incorrect.
Yeah.
Because the information is not valid when you're talking about these size margin of errors, when you're talking about saying that certain states might be in play or might not be in play with so few voters polled. This is not a poll that is being used by a reporter in an appropriate way. I don't think. That's my personal opinion. And I think that's a problem that we've talked about a lot, where there's a responsibility of the media and of the public to look at a poll and say, okay, well, fine, what's in the poll? What's the story behind the poll before making claims about what the poll says? And I don't think that was done in this case.
And almost all the states are single digits separating the two.
There are
and
also
sometimes 3 or 4 points.
There are very few state polls. I mean, that's what we do with our partnership with NBC News, because there are very few people and organizations that go into particular states, particularly the battleground states, and talk about what the results are in a scientific way with transparent methodology and completely transparent methodology. I think with regard to this poll, the attraction is that it was done state by state, and so it was stratified by state. So it wasn't that the larger states with population had more of the 1,200 interviews. They stratified it across, which meant that each of the 6 states had 200 interviews within each one, which is a standard practice when you're looking across different geographies, sometimes different genders or race. So methodologically, there is a lot to say in terms of how the poll was conducted.
And they do, when they put it all together, do conclude, as we know about a lot of places nationally and in the states, that Donald Trump is doing very well with his base, but among suburban, moderate, and independent voters, not so hot.
But you didn't need this poll to tell you that. There's
No.
national polls that are done in
Sure.
better ways that tell you that and have told us that every week for the last, 2.5 years.
Yeah, so I think the triple pun here is that this is good news.
Triple pun?
Good news and bad news. How's that? Double pun.
It's double pun. I was looking at where's the triple?
Yes.
Is it and somehow?
I don't know. Anyway, but so it's good news and bad news. Good news is there's helpful things in here, perhaps. Bad news, we're not really loving it too much.
buyer beware.
Yep. Okay, so the candles have been blown out. The birthday is over. But now we can get back to the topic of age, and this is a really interesting
back
poll.
to the topic.
Back to the topic. It's what I
So,
deal
so
with
we're
daily. But the thing about my birthday, if I can just digress for a moment, is
Your birthday festival.
the
Festival, yes.
the festivities. Yes, quite an event we had indeed. But I want to point out that in 2 years, when I turn 70, I will be halfway between 20 and 120, and I think that's somewhat disconcerting.
So you are middle-aged.
Yeah.
Well, actually,
if you can live
We'll
to
just
120,
keep moving the goalposts.
which is the
Yeah.
segue into the
Actually,
poll.
not according to this poll, which was done in late 2018 by SurveyMonkey for Axios on HBO, which is actually a news documentary, which I believe they had a 4-part series last fall. But the survey focused on how long Americans would like to live. And I know we talk about methodologies a lot, and this is an online poll by SurveyMonkey, so not a probability-based poll, but it does show some interesting attitudes about what Americans think of living to life expectancy, which now is 81 years of age for women and 77 years for men. So I think you guys are catching up. But basically, most Americans said that they would like to live longer than the average life expectancy. The quality of life had a lot to do with it. How about you guys?
Well, as the senior member of the team here,
And perhaps you want to speak for those 65 and older?
Yeah. Well, it's interesting. I thought in the numbers, a couple things. First of all, men are a little more prone to wanting to live longer, as are older people. In terms of the choices of living longer, living shorter than life expectancy, or about as long as life expectancy. So there was some differences in that regard. And to live past 100, well, older folks not as eager to do that. And I suspect that has to do with some creaking and cracking that comes with this advancing age.
I thought that was the most interesting thing in here, at least for me, is this question about, do you want to live past the age of 100? Now, that would have been a ridiculous question even maybe 10 or 15 years ago. But there's a lot of science going on that is extending the possibility of long life. And I think we see that at least it strikes me in some of the Hollywood stars that I didn't think were still alive, and they're passing away at like 98, 99, and you're like, they're still alive? And a lot of that has to do with, obviously, there's certain things that give quality of life that allow people to live longer, and there's medications and medical techniques and things like that. But the opportunity to live to that length is now something where you can ask this question, I think, with a straight face, and people will actually give it thought. What struck me as most interesting is what you just said, is that for people 18 to 34, 23, 25% if you get up to 64 think, I might want to live that long. And it gets actually over 50% if you say depends on the quality of life, which makes sense, right? Mm-hmm. Yes, I'd like to live to 100 if I can still run a marathon and,
And also have the financial wherewithal. I think that's a big deal.
Sure, that too.
We're worried about healthcare issues, we're worried about financing issues in the quality of care, not just the medical issues.
But when you get older, when you get over 65, then that dropped to just 17% who said, I want to live to 100. Until you ask that same question, depends on the quality of life. And the difference is not significant. It's just under 50%. It's just over if you're 18, 25. It gets to this idea that if you could live to 100 and you're in reasonably good shape, which is now a possibility, it's
why
like,
not?
Okay, I could do that. So the one thing I would say is, though, is anybody thinking about, wouldn't you get bored? I mean, my mom passed away in her mid-90s, and she was in good health, and she was bored. She was just kind of done. Her friends had passed, family members had passed, her doctors had passed. She outlived them all.
Well, I think you had a relative.
Yeah, my grandmother
got excited when
my grandmother, whenever she
died.
saw that a doctor that she'd had passed, there was always a slight grin on her face, like if he was so smart, why would he be dead and I'd be still living?
Well, I think that quality of life issue is very important. And Lee, your mother-in-law, who is also deceased, I think she put it very well. She said, "Old age is not for sissies." Mm-hmm. And she did live well into her 90s, as did her husband, who actually outlived her and
pushing
was
100.
pushing 100 at
and doing
almost
very well.
97.
And a former guest on Poll Hub a couple
Ray
years
Robinson.
back.
And then there's your dad, who is, a at
A
his
spry
age.
88.
Yes, who I always
How old's your dad now?
love. My dad is now 88.
88, and he went
And
he went
and a
roller
half,
skating
and a half,
and he
as
went
he
roller
would- as he
skating
would
with
say.
us last year and would not take no for an answer. I'm going out there. I'm going to get on the roller rink.
Well, my favorite story is when my
And beat
dad
us
was
bowling also. Beat everybody on the Marist staff bowling.
He
So-
did. But my favorite story is when he was having an intake into a procedure that he was going to be having, and he was asked by the nurse whether he uses a cane. And he said yes. And so she asked him, well, where's the cane? And he said, well, I only use it when I'm climbing hills. So
She said, "I'll put that down as a no."
and the next question was, do you have trouble walking? And she decided she would put that down as a no
So
as well.
we all have experience with
Yep.
people living into quite late in life. I'll start with you, Lee. Do you want to live to 100?
Well, I think if I either 100 or I'd like to be the third partner on the 2,000-Year-Old Man series between Mel Brooks and Carl Reiner. That probably pushing it, but very good if you like that.
You'd
kind
want to
of
be
thing.
in that trio because you're a funny guy, but you'd be the least funny in that
That's
trio.
right, but they're both pushing 100. Come
yeah,
to think
no,
of
there
it.
you go. They are. Barb?
I think I'm with your mom because I really love the outdoors and I love to be very active. And I think if I got to a point where I couldn't do that, I would have a tough time getting through each day.
So I agree with that, and that it just comes from both my mom and my dad's. The experience with that is that even the answer of depends on the quality of life. Even if the quality of life is actually pretty good, unless something really miraculously changes, where 100 you're feeling like you're 20, which I don't think is going to happen since I don't
But I
feel
can
like I'm
still
20
ride my
anymore.
horses?
And you can ride your horses, then maybe. But short of that, I gotta say, I don't have a great desire to live to the century.
But the question is, would you like to? It's whatever date it is. Would you like to last another month, wherever you are on that scale?
Yeah, well,
maybe.
everybody's
going
gonna
to
say that.
I'm not quite
Not
ready.
quite ready,
Not
yeah.
quite ready. Maybe next week. Maybe next month.
Well, that will do it for this fitting end somehow to this edition of Poll Hub. This was episode 95, by the way. Speaking of late,
counting down,
Well,
yeah.
speaking of
Counting
late in your 90s.
That's right.
Our-
100 approaching.
Our Poll Hub is late in the 90s. Poll Hub is, as always, a production of the Marist Poll here at Marist College in Poughkeepsie, New York. Mary Griffith is our executive producer. And Kenny Marples, I believe this is the last episode he will be editing. So if it's really good, send some comments. Say, kudos, Kenny, you did a great job. If it's really bad, don't send anything. He doesn't need to hear that.
But he's still looking for a job. And
Oh, I think he
doing
did
job
get one.
interviews.
I think he
It's
no, I don't
close.
know.
It's close.
It's
think he
close.
got
I
it.
think it is.
He will
actually
be gainfully employed shortly. And what am I doing? I'm thanking everybody. I'm
Roper-
thanking everybody.
the Roper
I'll thank
Poll.
Roper also. We're going to talk about something they're doing also at a couple of programs. But the Roper Center is something we rely on for archival data. It's housed at Cornell University, and we can look at old questions, look at trends, look at results over the decades.
And please reach out to us on social media. You know, we're at Marist Poll on Twitter and on Facebook. And please don't forget to subscribe. See you next time.